The delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying she's going to go in that league and tear it apart. This kid's on the wrong team. She's got the wrong skill set to handle the physicality of that league. And she's a rookie. The delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying she's going to go in that league and tear it apart. There were actually odds on she's third or fourth in betting odds on being MVP of the WNBA. These people are so disrespectful and so unknowledgeable and so stupid that it gives women's basketball a bad name. Okay, so the kid was set up for failure right from the beginning.
Let that sink in for a second. A Hall of Fame coach, someone who built his entire legacy on recruiting and developing talent, just called millions of basketball fans delusional, unknowledgeable, and stupid. Why? Because they believed a rookie named Caitlin Clark could finish top 4 in MVP voting. And here's the twist that makes this story so devastatingly perfect. Those fans were right. Geno Auriemma was wrong. And that one miscalculation didn't just embarrass him. It unraveled decades of carefully constructed authority. This isn't just about basketball. It's about power, ego, and what happens when someone who's been the gatekeeper for so long realizes the gate doesn't matter anymore. Caitlin Clark didn't need Geno's approval. She didn't need his program. She didn't need his validation. And when he finally came crawling back with $1 million offer, she said the one word that cost him everything: no. If you believe the story behind the story matters, the dynamics that the mainstream media won't touch, smash that like button right now. It tells us you're here for the truth, not the talking points. So let's rewind to where this all started, because Geno's downfall wasn't an accident. It was built on a foundation of arrogance that began years ago when Caitlin Clark was just a teenager with a dream. And for her, that dream had a name: UConn. Clark admitted it openly later. UConn was the coolest place on earth. The dynasty, the banners, the legacy of Diana Taurasi, Maya Moore, Breanna Stewart. For a kid growing up in Iowa, watching women's basketball, there was nothing bigger than Storrs, Connecticut. Nothing more prestigious than playing for Geno Auriemma. She wanted that jersey. She wanted that stage. She wanted to be part of the empire. But the call never came. Geno Auriemma, the man who built his reputation on spotting generational talent before anyone else, never picked up the phone. He never reached out. He never showed interest. And it wasn't an oversight, it was a choice. A deliberate decision that would haunt him for years. His excuse: UConn had already committed to Paige Bueckers, and he didn't want two-point guards in the same class. On the surface, fine. Recruiting is about fit, about timing, about roster construction. Except Geno didn't just pass on Clark, he insulted her. He later suggested that if Clark really wanted to play at UConn, she should have called him herself. Think about that for a second. The greatest recruiter in women's basketball history. The coach who made his name by identifying stars before they became stars decided Caitlin Clark wasn't worth pursuing, then blamed a teenager for not chasing him. That's not a recruiting miss. That's disrespect, the kind you file away, the kind you remember. So Clark made her choice. If Geno didn't believe in her, she'd go somewhere that did. She committed to Iowa, a program that didn't have UConn's mystique, didn't have the banners, didn't have the dynasty shine. To the basketball world, it looked like a consolation prize. A good player settling for a good program because the great one passed. But Caitlin Clark didn't settle. She built. From the moment she stepped on campus in Iowa City, she wasn't Paige Bueckers' shadow. She wasn't Geno's backup plan. She was the plan, the centerpiece, the reason to believe. And she delivered in ways that shattered every expectation. Her logo threes weren't just highlights, they were statements. Her court vision wasn't just impressive, it was generational. And the crowds that showed up to watch her weren't just fans. They were witnesses to something the sport had never seen before. Iowa games became must-watch events, arenas sold out, TV ratings exploded. Families who'd never watched women's basketball before were suddenly planning their weekends around Hawkeye games. Clark wasn't just playing basketball. She was rewriting the cultural conversation around the sport itself. And through it all, there was Geno, watching from Connecticut, watching his chosen star, Paige Bueckers, battle injuries, watching UConn's dominance slip, watching a kid he dismissed become the biggest name in women's basketball. You'd think that would humble him. You'd think he'd acknowledge the miss, give credit where it was due, and move on.
No to the $1 million offer that came crawling back to her years later.
Like I said earlier, they actually had odds that, she was like third or fourth in the betting odds to be MVP of the WNBA. That's such a slap in the face to every WNBA player. It's unbelievable, right? That's the worst part about new fans. They have no perspective. There's no context. So they just say ridiculous nonsense.
Instead, he doubled down. There it is. That's the worst part about new fans. No perspective, no context, just ridiculous nonsense. This became Geno's pattern. Every time Caitlin Clark's name came up, he found a way to minimize it, to add a qualifier, to remind everyone that what they were seeing wasn't as special as they thought. If Clark hit a logo 3 or well, that's just playground basketball. If she broke a scoring record, well, the game's different now. If her fans believed in her potential, well, they just don't understand how the WNBA works. He tried to frame himself as the wise elder, the voice of experience bringing context to the hype. But people saw through it. Analysts saw through it. Other coaches saw through it. Because what Geno was really doing wasn't providing context. He was clinging to relevance. For decades, Geno Auriemma was the center of women's basketball, the coach who decided who mattered, the program that set the standard, the name that commanded respect. But Caitlin Clark flipped that dynamic. She didn't need his blessing to become the face of the sport. She didn't need UConn's platform to sell out arenas. She didn't need his approval to break into the mainstream. She built her empire without him. And every time she stepped on the court, every time she filled another arena, every time another record fell, it was a reminder. You had your chance, you said no, and I didn't need you anyway. But Geno couldn't accept that. He couldn't let go. So instead of celebrating what Clark was doing for the sport, instead of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, he'd underestimated her, he kept talking, kept adding disclaimers, kept finding ways to tie her success back to his program, his players, his legacy. And then he made the mistake that would cost him everything. He didn't just dismiss Caitlin Clark anymore. He went after the people who believed in her. Many of you saw this coming from a mile away. You called it in the comments months ago. You said Geno's obsession with Clark wasn't about basketball analysis. It was personal. And if you're nodding along right now, drop a comment and tell us what you think happens next. Because this story isn't over yet. June 2024. The Dan Patrick Show, Geno Auriemma sat down for what should have been a routine interview about the state of women's basketball. The WNBA season was underway. Caitlin Clark was tearing through her rookie year. The sport was enjoying unprecedented attention. This should have been a celebration. Instead, Geno launched an attack that would cement his legacy for all the wrong reasons. He didn't just question Clark's game. He didn't just express skepticism about her transition to the professional level. He went nuclear on her fans, called them delusional, said they had no understanding of basketball, claimed they were so clueless, so misguided, that they were actually damaging women's basketball itself. His crime? Her supporters believed Clark could finish top 4 in MVP voting as a rookie. That's it. That was the offense that triggered this Hall of Fame coach to insult millions of people who had just discovered the sport, people who were buying tickets, watching games, bringing their kids to arenas, growing the audience that women's basketball had been begging for decades.
What does bother me is some of the people I deeply respect. Their basketball credentials, their basketball history, their commitment to basketball and women's basketball, I think have really not covered themselves in glory with some of this commentary.
And Geno called them stupid. Even people who respected Geno's credentials, who admired his commitment to women's basketball, were stunned by what he was saying. This wasn't analysis. This wasn't tough love. This was a man watching his influence evaporate in real time and lashing out at anyone who represented the shift. But here's where the story gets delicious, because Caitlin Clark didn't respond with tweets. She didn't fire back in press conferences. She didn't need to. Her revenge came in the only language that matters in sports: results. She went out and won Rookie of the Year. Not just won it, dominated it, made it look inevitable. Then she earned all WNBA first-team honors, joining the league's elite in her first season. And when the MVP votes were counted, when the ballots were tallied, when the final rankings came out, Caitlin Clark finished fourth, exactly where those supposedly delusional fans said she would. Every prediction Geno mocked became reality. Every fan he insulted was vindicated. Every dismissive comment he made aged like milk in the sun. The rookie, who was supposed to get humbled by the professional game, instead rewrote what was possible for a first-year player. She didn't just meet expectations. She exceeded them while making it look effortless. And she did it all without saying Geno's name once. That's the most devastating part. Clark didn't need to engage. She didn't need to defend herself or her supporters. She just played basketball at a level that left no room for debate. Logo threes that defied physics, assists that broke defenses, court vision that seemed telepathic. Night after night, she delivered performances that silenced every critic except the one who couldn't stop talking. Because Geno kept going, even as the evidence mounted, even as Clark's trophy case filled, even as his own credibility crumbled. He couldn't let it go. Interview after interview, podcast after podcast, her name kept coming up. A little praise here, a qualifier there, a compliment wrapped in a disclaimer. The pattern was obvious to everyone. Caitlin Clark was living rent-free in Geno Auriemma's head, and the more he talked, the smaller he looked. But words eventually weren't enough. Geno had tried to control the narrative with his voice, with his platform, with his legacy. None of it worked. Clark kept rising, kept winning, kept proving him wrong. So he did the only thing he had left. He opened his checkbook. The $1 million offer came later, after Clark had already established herself as the biggest draw in women's basketball, after she'd proven she didn't need UConn, didn't need his program, didn't need his validation. It was for 8 weeks. A short-term league, a quick payday, a chance for Geno to attach his name to hers one more time. On paper, it looked like a no-brainer. Over $1 million for 2 months of basketball, most players would jump at that. Most players would see it as validation, as respect, as an opportunity. But Caitlin Clark isn't most players, and she saw it for exactly what it was. A lifeline from a man who once treated her like an afterthought, a desperate attempt to stay relevant by riding her coattails, a chance for Geno to rewrite the story and pretend he'd always believed in her. She said no, not with rage, not with a press conference, not with social media drama, just a simple, quiet, devastating no. And that rejection hit harder than any crossover she'd ever thrown, because it wasn't about the money, it was about power. For the first time in his career, Geno Auriemma needed someone more than they needed him. And that someone remembered being ignored as a teenager, remembered being dismissed throughout her rise, remembered every backhanded compliment, every qualifier, every attempt to minimize what she'd built. The kid Geno never called became the star who didn't answer when he finally reached out. That's not just revenge, that's poetry. Because here's what Geno never understood. Caitlin Clark didn't need his approval to become great. She didn't need UConn's platform to change the sport. She didn't need his validation to fill arenas and break records. She built her empire on her own terms, in her own way, without owing him anything. And when he finally recognized that, when he finally tried to buy his way into her story, it was too late. The power had shifted. The gate he'd guarded for decades didn't matter anymore. She'd found another way through, built her own entrance, and left him standing on the outside looking in. Every coach who ever dismissed a player because they thought they knew better just got a lesson. Every gatekeeper who ever underestimated someone because they didn't fit the expected mold just watched what happens when that person proves you wrong. Caitlin Clark didn't just succeed despite Geno Auriemma's dismissal. She succeeded in a way that exposed how little his approval ever mattered. If this story proves anything, it's that the best revenge isn't loud. It's not petty. It's not reactive. The best revenge is building something so undeniable that the people who doubted you have to watch from the sidelines while you rewrite history. And if you want to see more stories about the power dynamics that shape this league, the moves that matter beyond the box score, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started. And next time, we're breaking down how Clark's rejection sent shock waves through an entire league structure that had taken her for granted. Geno Auriemma built a dynasty on knowing who mattered before anyone else did. But he missed the biggest star of this generation. And when she proved him wrong at every turn, when she vindicated every fan he insulted, when she rejected his attempt to rewrite history, she didn't just humble him, she made him irrelevant. That's how empires crumble. Not with a roar, but with a whisper. One word, one decision, one devastating no.